Confession 1. I hate my father. I used to live in Eden, though at the time I called it Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Growing up just beyond the rim of Philadelphia, I lived with my family in a historic 19th century house. I was the oldest of 3 kids, spaced 3 years apart, a blonde to my sister's brown hair to my brother's black. 3 precious siblings with an affinity for matching Barney t-shirts. We were birthed by a mostly Mexican father and a wholly Polish mother with the cutest accent imaginable. My father worked a mere mile down the road, and my mother maintained our home with delicious home-cooked meals and beautifully stenciled living room borders. I bunked with my younger brother for many years before graduating to the attic, a converted bedroom complete with Paul Bunyan steps and slanted roofs, a magical dwelling place for an 11-year-old boy. But the best part of my home in Eden wasn't even the house itself. It was the backyard, my backyard. From secret storage areas to sweet grape patches, each corner of that yard unleashed my budding imagination, from elaborate fantasy adventures to more simple baseball ones. Every afternoon I'd throw baseballs against the mammoth trunk of our backyard tree and field grounders, would launch balls high into the air and catch them, assuming all 9 positions for my favorite baseball team who played just 30 minutes away, the Phillies. But Langhorne exemplified Eden far beyond a slanted attic and some backyard ball. It was my family. It was always my family. Loving parents with a subsequent love for the Lord, a younger brother and a younger sister who'd follow any adventure I concocted, and a wonderful assortment of aunts, uncles, and cousins, capped by the greatest grandparents a boy could ever desire. My dad's parents lived hardly a mile down the road, and perhaps my fondest childhood memories involved walks through historic downtown Langhorne to spend the day at my grandparents' house. My grandparents also came over to watch me and my siblings often, though their authoritative presence never felt like an obligatory watching, more like sacred bonding. On those shared afternoons together, I'd lend my imaginary Phillies cap to my grandmother who would lob me balls to hit onto Maple Avenue. Throughout the week, I'd ride with my cigar-toting grandfather and his faithful radar detector as he ferried me and my sister across the Delaware River to our Christian school in New Jersey. My little sister and I wore precious coordinating uniforms to school, and when my grandfather couldn't drive us, we'd tote our bulky lunchboxes onto public school buses and sit to ourselves while all the other rambunctious kids wore clothes that didn't restrict their necklines. From the onset, I loved school. Always enjoyed bubbling in answers on tests and doing homework, and summer packets of busy work were just delightful. I always scored higher than everyone in my class, and I always received glowing comments from teachers within each and every orange envelope of a report card. I was as well-behaved and normal a student as they came, not at all a loudmouth, but not the shy one at the end of the lunch table either. In class, I was the stereotypical smart kid. At recess, I was the token creative, organizing games and adventures for his classmates just as I did with my siblings at home, the most epic of which once involved an underwater escape through actually forested school grounds. After toting bulky lunchboxes back onto public school buses and changing out of our Navy uniforms for the day, my siblings and I would ride our bikes 2 buildings down Maple to a Methodist church with bells. A church noteworthy not for the church itself, but its massive parking lot and plenty of room to ride for hours. Some weekends, my cousin joined us, and we'd spend entire afternoons behind that church, imagining ourselves as pioneering refugees, ancient adventurers, or elite Pokemon masters. Such stellar school and home life carried into a loving church community as well. Observing my parents before and after each service, I sensed their intimate friendship with so many different church members, and this always comforted me. Despite my own lack of friendship among other church kids, my parents' apparent belonging affirmed my own belonging. I belonged because they belonged. For many years, my father and I attended our church's bi-weekly father-son program, hallowed nights which only accentuated this sense of belonging. Every other Tuesday night, dads and sons alike bonded over games, crafts, stories, and devotions, prayer. Every couple months, we'd also venture beyond our church's walls with day hikes along woodsy trails or overnight treks to a cabin in the snowy Poconos. Beyond organized events, the program allowed fathers and sons to complete tasks together on their own time, and boys would earn illustrious badges, much like Boy Scouts minus the oath and selling popcorn, and for Christians. I did all kinds of physical, mental, and spiritual tasks to earn those badges. I'd run various distances as my dad cheered and recorded times with a stopwatch, and I memorized scripture with him too. My dad showed me how a car works under the hood and how a toilet flushes under the lid. life lessons that remain with me years later every time I check my oil or unstick a running toilet. My father and I embraced each and every task, and I easily earned more badges than any of the other boys. Accumulated so many badges for my mom to sew onto my uniform that other dads joked I'd soon be unable to hold up my chest anymore. Those rows of tiny square badges on a pale blue shirt served as an emblematic representation of the special bond I shared with my father, tangibly sewn markers of fatherhood and sonhood alike, of life and life lived well. This was my life in Eden, one overflowing with merit badges and belonging, strong roots of belonging that dug deep from church to school to home. From the earliest of ages, those roots pointed me to the one called God and a man named Jesus, and I cannot recount a single day spent consciously unaware or disbelieving of his existence. Truthfully, I cannot recall ever thanking God for such blessings as a child, for devoted parents and an incredible school and huge paved parking lots. The serene scene daily surrounding me simply seemed so very normal, so natural and inherent to life. One perfect story amid an uncontaminated world in which surely everyone dwelled. Growing up in Eden, I followed the same initial mindset of Adam and Eve, born of dust and bone, their first bare steps unspoiled amid their own lavish landscape. I lived an innocent existence, incapable of grasping or fathoming words like hardship or adversity. Struggle. Would not have recognized such alien vocabulary. For several faithful years, my family closed our days with devotions in the living room. My brother, sister, and I would sit around the room wearing our father's old, oversized t-shirts, our naked legs void of pants, while my dad read our nightly devotion, a Bible passage and a story, and then we'd talk about the reading and pray. I loved praying, loved talking out loud to a God who so plainly existed. One particular night when I was 11, however, played differently than all the others. I entered the living room and sat uneasily to the floor, my senses overcome by the stark tone contaminating the most central soil of my Eden, our hub for devotions and prayer out loud and togetherness. My father had cast hints in the weeks prior, but neither I nor my siblings had ever taken him seriously. After all, Langhorne was our home, the only home we'd ever known. Surely his hints had been cruel jokes, not at all realistic nor reasonable. And yet, on that unsuspecting February night of 1999, my father indeed confirmed reality and defied reason, gathered the family around that pivotal living room, and told us he'd been offered a job promotion in Monroe, Georgia, a city hundreds of impossible miles from Eden. My 11-year-old heart sank within my oversized t-shirt. Silence engulfed the room, though it didn't take long for me, my brother, and my sister to lash out obstinate streaks of denial toward my father. Within minutes, I was racing to the attic and weeping into my bed. My grandmother came over later that night to watch her grandkids. She calmed me down with less watching and more sacred bonding. For the rest of the night, I took hope in the fact that my father wouldn't say yes to the promotion, that perhaps he'd remember his kids' enraged reactions and simply turn down such an absurd offer, that of course he'd keep his family in Langhorne, because it was his home, our home. My dad picked up me and my sister from school the next day, which was unusual, and she popped the question before I could summon the courage myself. Asked if he'd taken the job. My dad confirmed he had. We'd be moving to Georgia that coming summer, just a few short months away. And a long, tearful trek home it was. In a moment, Eden was uprooted and ravaged. Soon, I'd be banished from her gates forever. For weeks, I couldn't digest reality, couldn't embrace reason. Couldn't comprehend what was happening. When you love a place dearly, it's devastating to leave. It wrecks you, leaves you with an unshakable sense of uncertainty. You wander and you restlessly wonder whether that place you treasured was even real to begin with, and whether the next place will even be worth your discontented breath. Leaving Eden is awful. July 18th, 1999, a Sunday. My family attended both church services that morning, our last ones as members, and said goodbye to fathers and sons and other people young and old whom I never fathomed having to wish goodbye. My grandparents held a going-away get-together down the road from my house, which was no longer my house. My attic bedroom with the slanted roofs was now occupied by another boy, a boy not named me with family members not mine, inhabiting memory-stocked rooms now theirs. I didn't eat anything that day. That afternoon we watched one final ball game at my grandparents' house, and the Phillies beat the Devil Rays 3-2. The same Tampa Bay team who later dropped the ominous devil from their mascot when the Phils dominated them 9 years later to win the World Series. I remember few days more vividly than moving day. When the game ended, reality finally arrived after 5 months of agonizing anticipation. I tearfully climbed into our green Dodge Caravan as aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents watched soberly from the driveway. I closed my tear-rimmed eyes as my father prayed a courageous prayer from the driver's seat, and I heard a tap on my window. I opened my watery eyes mid-prayer and saw my grandmother giving the goofiest face I'd ever seen from the other side of the glass. Instinctually made me smile as tears muddied my vision and Dad said amen. We pulled out, left the rest of our family in the dust of that driveway as my goofy grandmother's face turned normal again and cars returned home. For the next 2 days, we drove southward to ours, our new home, our new future, a future I'd have never seen coming 6 mere months ago. An abysmal future I already despised, spurred by a man I learned to hate as well. I certainly wasn't alone in my tearful indignation. Both my siblings hated moving too. They dreaded leaving behind our house, our church, our school, our family, our very lives, just like me. But within days of hitting our new driveway and loading our new Georgian home, they got over the change. They laughed, smiled, played, and went swimming in our fancy in-ground pool, let go their sadness and any lingering anger. Became happy, normal kids again. Not me. I refused to simply let go of this move, this injustice. Refused to laugh or smile or play or go swimming. For hours, I locked myself inside my tiny non-attic of a bedroom and I cried. Visualized faces no longer physically in my presence. Old classmates, family members, beloved grandparents. My grandfather with a hickory pipe in his mouth and my grandmother's goofy goodbye on the other side of a tinted window. This is wrong, my thoughts resounded. All of it was wrong. Nothing was right. I started detesting everything. Despised my new middle-of-nowhere house, not 1 mile but hundreds away from my grandparents. I refused daily tasks like eating, saw no purpose in meals, and felt treated like an inept infant when my parents forced me to chew and swallow. It made me loathe them, too, especially my father. I hated my father. Ignored him and decidedly spurned him every opportunity I could. Blamed him entirely for dragging 4 innocent souls into a godforsaken land of soggy, boiled peanuts and repulsive yalls. I couldn't dare grant him the satisfaction of seeing me enjoy life again. Wouldn't. Perhaps above all else, I hated God, my other father. The same God I'd believed every conscious day of my existence. I still believed him with shallow head knowledge, but I withheld my heart. Wanted nothing to do with a God who'd allowed this move and purposed it. Forever exiled from Eden's gates, I saw no use for God anymore. What was the point? What did reading my Bible or praying matter anymore? Would going to church and singing God's songs take me back home? There was no point. No point for an earthly or a heavenly Father who'd both failed me. No point for anyone or anything, really. Within weeks, I grew into a bitter, gnarled antithesis of who I was in Eden. Became such a loveless loner that only a 4-legged miracle could save. Over the last quarter century, I've realized God can and does, in fact, use whomever or whatever he desires for his purposes, his redemption. In the Old Testament, he used prostitutes and donkeys. In the New Testament, he used, well, prostitutes and donkeys. He's nothing but consistent. Asses aside, God used another little 4-legged creature as a mighty instrument of his purposes, an instrument of his redemption for me. After transplanting our family 5 states away from the only home we'd ever known, my parents decided a pet might be therapeutic and beneficial. In Pennsylvania, we'd own a rabbit and countless death-prone fish, but this pet in Georgia would be unlike any other. This pet would truly become family, would change my life in monumental ways I'm still unpacking over a decade later. A few weeks after we moved, my father came home late from work one humid summer night. The entire family knew what was coming, and when he finally arrived, we raced to the driveway, though I followed with more of a deliberate walk from the rear. My dad parked his car and opened the door, and there she was, a puppy smaller than a football, cradled in my father's lap, afraid out of her 2-month-old mind. For the briefest moment, I resonated with this rat terrier for leaving the only home she'd ever known. Her white, thinly haired body was spotted with black like the canine version of a Chick-fil-A cow, her cheeks and eyebrows tinged with tan. She was so tiny and innocent, until we set her down in the living room, and then she went wild. Jumping from couch to chair to floor to couch again, she was a perpetually lit rocket of energy. She made herself immediately at home, much like my brother and sister had learned to do, and I realized something. Apparently, she wasn't the fearful puppy forced from the only home she'd ever known. Not in the least. My original inclinations had been false, and clearly we didn't have as much in common as I'd first surmised. I resented that puppy, but only at first. Within hardly another day, it became impossible to look at her sincere, whiskered face and doggedly withhold my love. So I came around. Even got to name this newest four-legged member of our family. Annie. My entire family agreed. It fit. A lovely name for an already beloved addition. Though my entire family contributed, I voluntarily shouldered most of Annie's responsibilities, from meal times to tricks to potty training. I hated that last one, hated punishing her for messes on the carpet. But Annie learned, and she never held a single scolding against me, respected me and loved me all the more. Despite our vastly different extroverted and introverted personalities, Annie and I naturally clicked. She got me, and I got her. From neighborhood walks to cuddling at night, Annie saved the rest of my summer from devastating despair, gradually helping me move past the move to Georgia, the morning of Eden. Upon moving to the South, I had no idea the long road that lay ahead, the many unknown, unforeseen, struggle-laden chapters that were still to be written. Redemption would not occur overnight. It would take many years of weary journeying to rediscover the light glowing beneath the cracks of Eden's locked gates. But Annie was that first glimmer of white to break the black, and her purpose story was only just beginning to intertwine with mine. When summer ended, fall began, the next cyclic season for humanity and for my new story as well. Against my will, I would regularly have to leave Annie behind at home, would once again load my backpack 5 mornings a week and fulfill a familiar routine, though walking new, jagged paths entirely beyond Eden's soft soil.